Scum one, scum all, and scum as you are. I'm Vulture Culture, and this is the Korg Mono Poly from 1981. This is an incredible 4 VCO paraphonic, not really monophonic or polyphonic, but paraphonic synth that is 40 years old. And this one in particular is in stunning condition. It's pretty much mint, and it's just crazy to have my fingers on a synthesizer like this because it's one of those like legendary synths. So we're going to try to go through almost everything you can do with this synth. Luckily, I've got some people in the stream who know more about it than I do. So this is my first real chance to turn this thing on and explore it. But we're going to be checking out a lot of the sounds. So welcome to the live stream, and this will be really great. Yo, I don't know who just did that. Let's see here. That was Yo, shout outs to Jamie for the $20 tip. I appreciate you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's start with turning off the filter, getting it kind of just basic, turning up the sustain for everything, and checking out the sound of the sawtooth wave. And let's see. You'll notice we have a little reverb on. That's Inktomi. That's a plugin that will be available for members of this channel in the next few months, but we'll get there. So let's keep moving here. Yeah, just very gorgeous basic tone here of the synthesizer. We also have a nice triangle wave that we could work with. Interesting the way I'm kind of like dropping a couple of... I feel like I've got something a little bit... some sort of funny thing going on with the synth right now because of turning a couple of the knobs. I'm like not convinced I don't have something on. So if you hear something or whatever, let me know, okay? Oh, we're in Unison. I want to stay over here in poly. It's interesting because I'm not like really hearing that note. Oh, I know why. Because as we move through these different... So let's set them all over here and turn the level up for all of these. That would probably be the smart thing to do, right? What's so crazy about this is experiencing the synth for the first time, you're sort of like aware of where Korg would end up going almost a decade later with the Wave Station, where you can tune each of the VCOs to different values when it comes to ranges and even waveforms. And as you play through, you can get different stuff. That was the issue there. Yeah, super interesting. We got a bunch of different key assign modes. We're going to get into all of it for sure. Yeah, let's turn the release down too, just so we get... Yeah, it's probably better. There. So a nice, big, fat low end here. We can actually transpose the keys down here. Yeah, just massive, massive low end. So the first thing I'd like to ask everybody who's watching this video is, these go for about $2,500 on the vintage market, but I believe you can get a Behringer monopoly for a lot less. So go ahead and drop a comment if you think it's worth going vintage or if the Behringer version is good enough. I'd like to know what people think, because I think the Behringer monopoly is probably one of the synths I'd be interested in getting more than the rest of them out there, for sure. Sadly, I have both a MS-20 and a Poly 6, and it'd be fun to sort of shoot them out and figure out which, where the sound deviations are and not, but we'll have to do that another stream. So anyways, let's set these all to sawtooths now, and we will be able to hear the sound of the sawtooth for real. It's kind of got like a hollow sound to it, which makes me think I'm doing something wrong. Right? I don't know what that is. I might be doing something silly as far as the way the filter is. You'll notice how sometimes we're getting like double triggers and stuff. It's interesting. Edgetone says, I will never buy another Behringer product. I hate their approach to business and customers. Yeah, it's definitely contentious, let's say. I can move this over to single trigger to see if that helps. Yeah, interesting. I'm going to disable the chorus I have going. I have a very slight amount of chorus, but I want to make sure that I'm getting this very cleanly so that you guys can hear that. I like some chorus on a synth, but... It's interesting, I'm getting these like little hung notes. I don't know what that's about. See, I'm holding one key, but getting some bleed over. Oh, auto dampening might be the problem. You always figure out what it is, right? That's a thing. So... So what's interesting about this synthesizer is that although you have 4 different VCOs to check out, you also have only one filter. So unlike on the Poly 6 or most polyphonic synthesizers, you're always going to be stuck with that one filter no matter what notes you play. So to give an example of that real quick, what we could do is we could play a pad, right? We'll go with, whatever, D minor. And we'll transpose it up so we're a little bit higher. Typical sawtooth pad, right? We can actually detune it independent of these tune controls here. So we can have a little bit of that sound there, which is cool. But if we use the filter here, we can kind of dial in like a medium attack, medium decay, medium sustain, medium release type sound. Right, and kind of mirror that a little bit with the VCA, and now we hear nothing without any envelope intensity. So you'll notice as long as I'm holding this note down, we're still sort of stuck with that filter. I can move the trigger over here to multiple, and that will allow us to be able to re-trigger every time we hit a note. So this is the difference here. And it's actually pretty, I'm impressed by how it sounds. I'm hearing a little bit of a hum. I thought I canceled that out earlier. Let me go check real quick and just make sure that I've got that under control. Yeah, I mean, it's about as good as I can do on this one, unfortunately. So a little bit of a hum today. Sorry about that. That always happens sometimes when you get a brand new vintage synth. They've got a little ground hum or something. Mostly canceled out, hopefully. That is not considered paraphonic. Yeah, so this is a paraphonic synth aquatic. But what's interesting about it is that I don't know if the word paraphonic was really in use or something, because everybody calls it, the mono poly. And yeah, so you can play polyphonically, but it really is paraphonically, sort of like the modern equivalent would be like a Moog matriarch, right? Where you have multiple VCOs, but you're stuck with that one filter. But I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like you can still do some pretty, cool stuff. So like, the thing is though, that every time I hit a note, I'm getting a new shape, right? So for this one, I might actually put in a single trigger. So if I'm holding down, I can play a little melody with my right hand and it'll follow that shape. So you kind of can figure out ways to make that filter work for you, right? Which is super cool. So anyways, let's turn that intensity off here, but let's crank up a little resonance and hear how this sounds. So it's a very nice, bright, throaty filter, and it pushes a lot of bass. So that's one of those things about synths from this era is a lot of times the filters will just like annihilate the bass. Underneath it, you can see I have a Moog source here. When you crank the resonance on the source, you're not getting any bass through, right? It just becomes all high end. Whereas on this, the Korg filters from the 80s always had just this very bassy sound to them, which you either love or hate. It's not for everybody because they can be a little bit too dark, a little too murky almost. For me, I think it's mysterious and, gives it depth and dimension. For another person, it might just sound dull. That's kind of the funny thing about synthesis in general, is that you sort of, depending on where you're at, you get different results. So... Yes, I'm a big fan of Korg. Let's crank the resonance a little more. You get really low, nice and intense sound to it. And that's the thing about this SSM 2044 filter chip, which is the same filter that was used in the Prophet 5, the PPG Wave, the Poly 6, of course. And I point to it as though it's over there. Usually I have a Poly 6 over there. It's in the shop right now. But it's I just think it's one of the best filters from the era. Everybody is going to have their opinion about what is a good filter from the 80s, but in my journey buying and playing vintage synthesizers, it really, I think that any synth that has an SSM 2044 chip in it, like the Kawai 240 or the K3 has that same chip. I just think those synths sound great almost always. It's different for everybody, but yeah, it's a thing. How's it going? I've got Johnny up in the stream. So any 1/8 inch din outs for Eurorack stuff. So you've got CV in and out, trigger in and out, trigger polarity, VCO FM in, filter control for the filter, Portamento, and an arpeggio trigger in. So yes, you can actually run some stuff out. I have a Kenton Pro Solo Mark II that I have set up with this, but I haven't been able to get it to work 100% right yet for this stream, so we'll have to get there. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Polyphonic mode right now, which is cool because you'll see that it cycles through the VCOs as I play, so limited to 4 notes because of course there's only 4 voltage controlled oscillators. But we have a few other key assign modes we could use. Polyphonically, we could use Unison share. Now this is super cool. It's kind of like what the Jupiter 8 does, but if I play one note, it's going to play all 4 VCOs at once for a very rich, gorgeous sound. Just immediately beautiful. But there's some times where maybe you want to play a little duophonically, like that. And so what we're seeing there, if you'll pay attention to the little LEDs, we're seeing that all 4 VCOs are triggering still. Same thing if I hit one note. So what's going on there? What's occurring, actually, is the VCOs are getting split up by how many notes I'm playing. So if I hold one note down, we'll see all 4 of them are going. If I hold 2 of the VCOs will be for one note and 2 will be for the other. If I do 3, we'll get some sort of odd math of one of the notes will be... Oh, that's interesting. So if I hold down 3 notes, VCO 4 drops out. So we're kind of back to just normal poly mode for 3 and 4 notes. Playing 1 or 2 notes, you get these really great really cool feature that you didn't see from a lot of synths at the time. Korg, with this synthesizer, was trying to create a really experimental way to make music, which was different at the time from any other synthesizer, and I think it still is that case. Yeah, so it's just got a really beautiful type of sound to it. And again, we can get a lot done with single or multiple trigger mode. So by putting into multiple mode, every time I play a key, we get a different result than if I'm in single. Where we're sort of fit into that shape that we've got before. So, yeah. A total fraction of a price of a Jupiter 8 or CS80. So most like Jupiter 8s go on the market for about $25,000. I don't think they really sell for that, but I wouldn't know because I've never tried to buy a Jupiter 8. But you can usually get Korg Mono polys for about $2,500, making it one of the more expensive vintage synthesizers that I have in the room. My goal with this channel is to share with people vintage synthesizers that you can actually afford. I guess I could say now because the deal fell through, but I almost bought a Yamaha CS70M, and I was going to get it for a good price for what it is, right? I mean, it's one of those really expensive collector synths. But I wasn't really, there was a part of me that wasn't excited because I was like, that's kind of different than everything else I've done with this channel. All of the synthesizers I have in this room, they're basically $2,000 or less. And I think on average, they're about $1,000 if you add them all up together and divide by the number of synthesizers I have, which has probably been 25, 30 at this point. And the point of the channel is to encourage people to buy vintage synths or check out vintage synths and to not feel intimidated. Because like the first time you go looking for a vintage synth and you're like, oh, I wonder how much a CS80 costs, you're going to get sticker shock because holy shit, do those fucking things cost a lot. But there's a lot of really cool synths, and I would say this is kind of at the top end of that category I like, which is really cool synths that are still affordable by today's standards, right? Now, it doesn't mean that everybody should go buy vintage, right? Because maybe you can't afford a $2,000 synth, and there are synths on the market, modern synths, that are cheaper than that. And there will also always be features that you get with modern synths that you won't get with any vintage synthesizer. But what you do get is a certain kind of magic, maybe, that might be worth getting. And for me, I think it's super cool to have a piece of history as well, something that's true. And whenever you buy a clone of a vintage synth, there's two sides to it. There's one side, which is most of the clones sound really good and pretty fucking close to the original. Starsky Carr's comparison of his Korg monopoly, or I think he was borrowing it, versus a Behringer monopoly was shockingly similar, except for the filter. He had to totally retune his filter because the filter as it came from the factory was just really dark. But aside from that, the sound was pretty much there. I don't think anybody but a synthesist is really going to hear the difference. But when it comes to let's just sidestep the ethics of Behringer for a second. That's a fair argument, but we don't even need to go there. It's more like this is, someone bled their sweat and tears into this thing in the fucking 80s making music. And so it's got a pedigree and a history to it that's more than just, the sound of it. This is a piece of history, and it's really fun to be able to play music, and it forces your mind to engage with the instrument in a different way than you would with a VST. Anyways, I probably have been rambling too long here. Let's check out Unison mode. That works basically like Unison Share, except now we are locked into one note at a time. Which is super cool, kind of what you would expect, but it is a pretty monstrous unison sound, and we can crank it up. Get a nice little resound here. And we'd set this to pitch. Really get a awesome throaty sound out of it. Just a nasty resound. So you can take this thing a lot further than, say, a lot of the other 80s poly synths or mono synths because you have those 4 VCOs. So, I mean, if we turn this detune up all the way, just for the fuck of it, and I would like to point out, that's the detune effect. That's not even, we can fuck with the tuning independently as well. But we can get really nasty. Yeah, just huge, just absolutely gangster. Let me catch up with the chat real quick. Maybe I'll just play some notes in Unison share mode. So we got a few things. Gato, welcome to the stream, my friend. Shane was asking, do I still have my Mirage? No, I just sold it, actually. Sad to see it go. Really awesome vintage sampler. But the Korg DSS-1, to me, I sort of connected with that synth a little bit more. I don't know why exactly. It's kind of one of those, up in the air things. I think also maybe Dub Station had something to do with that because his knowledge is vast, and like his trick to be able to route the VCF to the joystick, for instance, that's a really powerful trick to be able to get that real-time control out of a sampler that's otherwise like a big black box, like a Mirage, that you don't have that control over necessarily. So yes, and Machine Storm saying what scares people might be the upkeep and not knowing if someone botched the board to heck with poor solder jobs or warm-up times. Yes, and I've had that happen to me. There's been times where my synth techs open up a synth and been like, yo, someone tried to repair this and they had no fucking clue what they were doing. And that's kind of the thing about synthesizers. I was going to buy a Jupiter 6 at one point, and I was talking to the owner, and they didn't know a lot about synths, and they were saying, well, this thing's worth this much. And I said, well, you got to be aware of something, which is that there's visible damage to the outside of the synth. But unlike a guitar, where you can kind of look at it and go, okay, yeah, you can see a crack in the neck, that's going to be a major problem. If you don't know what to look for when you're opening one of these up, right, it's the Wild West. So I do encourage people to be smart about their purchases with vintage synths. I've gotten very lucky. I've had very few major issues with synths. And even the worst synth that I had about $100 in repair that I didn't recoup when I sold it, right? So shipping and everything, I still made my money back except for the $100 in repair. So it was really not that bad compared to I've made some decent money on selling synths. And so, that's a thing to think about too, is when you buy vintage as opposed to modern, it's holding its value, right? You buy a modern synth, it's like buying a modern car. As soon as you drive it off the lot, it's lost some value. Not as badly as when you drive a car off a lot, because I was able to sell the Korg Prologue for about $100 less than I bought it. So that's pretty cool. I got lucky because it was like I bought one of we didn't know, but it was maybe a year before they discontinued them. So the price went up around that point. So Jim says, I think Korg and Moog have the most aggressive sounding synths. I agree with that for sure. Moog definitely has like a clarity to the sound. Korg is going to give you the aggression, the darkness. So yes. And Shane asks, when messing with the detune, how do you ensure you're not going too far from standard tuning along with your band or other instrumentation? So, I mean, a really simple way is before the stream, let's put it back into poly mode real quick. I'll turn detune off. Let's go ahead and just open the filter up here. Bring the release down a bit. Right? That's kind of like your basic sound. What we could do is turn, or let's put it into Unison mode. I apologize. With VCO 1, we're only hearing that. I've turned the level of 2, 3, and 4 off. You could just load up a tuner, right? I have a tuner in the DAW, but you could also just use a guitar tuner, right? Or or a friend who has perfect pitch and know that that's C. I'm assuming this is C. I actually don't know. I didn't do too good of a tuning, but I think it is. I could also pull up another synth and just make sure it's like in tune with the D50, a digital synth that will be in tune. And then we could open up the second VCO and make sure that's in tune. And I did this before the stream where I tuned each of the VCOs, but you'll notice the tuning is different now because as the synth has heated up, those voltage-controlled oscillators will drift in and out too naturally anyways. So we just turn VCO 2 off and turn VCO 3 on. And get that one pretty in tune. Same thing with 4. And now they're not in perfect tune. That's part of the beauty of an analog synth from the 80s, but it's in pretty good tune. Yes, so 40 Thieves, A, welcome to the stream, homie. How's it going? But B, you're very right to point out that when you're buying vintage synths, you need to be aware of the issues, which is actually a really good segue to talk about this synth versus its sister, the Poly 6, which is one of my favorite synths. This synth has no memory. I don't know if we've talked about that, but this is one of those manual synths where what you see is what you get, where every single knob is what the synth is doing. It's literally just a potentiometer that is controlling a trim pot inside the analog circuitry. Whereas when you have a synthesizer that has patch memory, like a Prophet 5, Jupiter 8, or in fact, even Korg's sister synth to this, the Poly 6, which has the same filter, similar oscillators, if not the same oscillators, just configured a little different, but has patch memory. And Korg had a great idea that ended up being a terrible idea, which was, why don't we put a rechargeable battery inside the synth? Because otherwise, that battery will eventually die, and when it does, the user's patches will die with that battery, because you have to keep a battery going to that memory or else it's going to perish, right? And so they thought, well, what we'll do is we'll just put a rechargeable battery, so every time the synth is on, it'll charge the battery back up, and those patches will live forever, which is an amazing idea, except for the fact that those rechargeable batteries leak if they have been left off for a while. And so there are relatively few Poly 6s that have made it out of the 80s alive because of that issue. But interestingly, the monopoly's not like that, where the monopoly, in fact, actually doesn't have that issue. So that's a beautiful thing, right? It means that this synthesizer will, in theory, has a better chance of making it through. But like the SX240 you were talking about, 40 Thieves, you want to be aware of what the issues are. So with this synth, I believe the most common issue is that the key contacts die. So that's not the end of the world, right? Juno 106 is the voice cards die, you know. There's all sorts of things you want to be aware of, which again can make buying a vintage synth intimidating, but I hope by watching this channel and other ones like it that you can make a wise decision when it comes to this. If anybody else has any other thoughts about what makes a good vintage synth purchase, this would be a great time, because I know people watch these videos and it's because they want to know about what's a good purchase for them. Maybe they're thinking about a monopoly, so they want to see how it sounds, but your wisdom, speaking to all the scum out there, would be brilliant for people to hear from. And of course it is in there. It does have chord memory. That is true. What is up, Mighty Pinto, my friend? How are you doing? But of course, we can also take that, instead of detuning here, right, to get a really great, wow, that sounds awesome. Oh, God. Super, super good. Yes. Let's see what else anybody's saying. Yes, Yes, I never really thought about it, but a matriarch would be a super cool synth to compare because they're actually pretty much that same architecture, 4 VCOs into 1 filter. Of course, that synth's going to be more flexible because it's semi-modular, but definitely a thing. Yeah, you know, it sounds such a great super saw. But I believe this is correct. So if I turn off the levels of 2 and 4, so now we're just hearing that. I believe we won't hear any detune. Yes, so that's correct. Detune changes the pitches of VCO 2 and 4, but not 1 and 3. There's no difference if I turn that knob or not. But if I turn 2 and 4 on, you'll hear. Wow, that's just like massive super saw type sound. Something aside from like a modern synth that has like a crazy number of VCOs, I actually wouldn't think you could get that thick of a sound out of a vintage mono synth or mono paraphonic synth, right? Red glue issues with the JD800 is another good one. Yeah, the fun really begins with the yellow effects button. Hans Volta saying we can check that out in a second. I want to touch on the pulse width modulation. So first I'll put these all the way over to pulse width. So this is a square wave, right? I've got the width of the square all the way down. And I'm hearing nothing. Oh, I know why. It's because I'm through 0. So if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, Hans. This is actually a bipolar control, which I think was not labeled very well because considering like on the Chroma Polaris, right, which came out 3 years later, but you can see that it's bipolar by the way the iconography is. The fact that it goes from 0 to 10 would imply to me that it's like from no pulse width through 0, right? Or standard pulse width through 0. But in fact, 5 o'clock is the perfect square pulse width. Pulse width is just adjusting the shape of that square. And you can take it all the way through so that top goes to 0 and it cancels itself out. Super cool, but it would have made maybe more sense for it to be labeled differently than every other knob on this thing. But beggar, you know, that's just a little nitpick type thing. So this is the square wave. Cool. I'm gonna play it in poly too. You know, very Legend of Zelda from the NES or Pokemon Red and Blue. Good for making flute sounds, and actually we do have some noise, and unlike on some of the other vintage synths where it's like you've got different steps, this is fully adjustable, so we could get into that flute territory pretty easily. Is there a chorus on it right now? No. I disabled the chorus in Inktomi because I wanted to keep it super clear. So any like detune you hear, that's going to be the actual tuning of the oscillators that has that sound. How's it going, Jason? Welcome to the stream. So that's the sound of that, but where it gets, of course, fun is listening to the pulse width modulation. So let's make sure that's on triangle. And now I've set all of the VCOs to the pulse width modulation setting, which is, let's make sure I've got that going. As we crank up the intensity, you'll notice we can actually take the intensity of the pulse width modulation through 0 if you want that type of sound, right? But it's much more useful to be shy of that value. And that's just super lush, right? That's the point of pulse width modulation on these older synths, is because you didn't have as many sawtooth oscillators as you wanted. They found that pulse width modulation sort of looks or sounds like the sound of detuned oscillators, but you only need one. So it's pretty cool. It sounds great down low too. Oh, so nasty. Just super cool. Portamento, you already heard it, but just for the fuck of it. So we have Portamento control there too, and turn the release down on these guys a little bit. Seeing a bit aquatic, good to see you. Yes. Wish I could A-B my monopoly with this. Yeah, it would be super fun actually. Portamento. And then back up, you know. We kick it over to Unison share mode, right? Where we can get all four oscillators on one voice, and then as we play more keys, it gets divided down, and we get that. Just lush. That is, can we get some scum snobs in the chat right now for the lushness? Yeah, I mean, it's really great. Just immediately has that sound. And that's part of the appeal of some of these vintage knob-infested analog synths is it's kind of hard to make them sound bad. It's like, I mean, check that shit out. Definitely really cool. Yeah, it definitely is. Thank you for the snob emojis, Vulture Bomb. It is just really cool and an expressive way to play. So what else do we have? If we're in poly mode here, let's say I play a 4-note chord here and hit the chord memory button. Now we've put it into mono mode. But instead of all four VCOs being tuned to the same note, now they're tuned to that chord. So why don't we go ahead and add a little shape to this, add a little resonance, add a little bit of something in. Right? So that's a way you could do that. If you wanted to say, here's another thing to think about, is when I play in Unison, it's going to be real thick, right? Open that up all the way. Right, super, super thick. But maybe sometimes you want a lead that isn't that thick. So what we could do is hold a note down and hit chord memory again. And now I think... So this is a trick that works on the Poly 6. This is really interesting. Interesting, it doesn't work here. So on the Poly 6, you can hold down one note and get it to be monophonic that way. But here, it doesn't seem like that works exactly. One thing we could do is we could do a note separated by some octaves and get some like huge bass sounds. I mean, come on, right? It's just absolutely crazy. Marcus, welcome to the stream. I appreciate you loving the channel. That's awesome. Yes, it does have soul, Marcus. If your beard was a synthesizer, what synthesizer would it be? It would be a Behringer SH101. They ever do it in a desktop without the keyboard? No, they did not, Johnny. I don't know when. I want to say the EX800 was Korg's first desktop synth, somewhere around there. And it's a really cool synth. It's the Poly 800 in desktop form. So if you want to get kind of into this neighborhood, but you don't want to spend as much as this, you can usually get EX800s for around $400. And it's a similar architecture in that it's paraphonic, but you actually have 8 voices, I think, 6 or 8, digitally controlled oscillators as opposed to voltage controlled oscillators. So still analog, but not as wild in the tuning department. But very similar sort of sound and feel to it, where it's got the paraphonic filter, and for approximately a fifth of the price or a sixth of the price of a monopoly, it's not a bad option, actually. I've always wanted to shoot one of those out with my Poly 6, so that's a thing. The time you had just sounded like Erasure. Who needs a love like that when it was higher 20 seconds ago? How much was that? This is Korg monopolys tend to go for about $2,500 on the market. I don't ever discuss exactly what I paid for a synth, because I know a lot of the times the people I either bought or sold a synth to will watch these streams, and no one wants to feel like they either ripped me off or I ripped them off or anything like that, because sometimes like someone will sell me a synth and I genuinely believe they thought it was in perfect condition, but once we open it up with the tech there, we find out some problems with it or something. I don't want anybody to feel bad, so I just try not to talk about the specific money I spent on a synth. So it's some number between $1,500 and $3,000, let's say. But most of the time these things go for about $2,500. If you can get one for less than that, that's a good deal. If you can get one for about $2,500, that's like what it would go for. So that's super cool. And then of course there is the Behringer clone of this, which is substantially cheaper. I want to say it's like $600, something like that. John from Edgetone Studio says, Poly 800 was my first synth in 1984, $500 at Long McQuaid used. That's so funny that it was $500 back then, and they're still about $500 right now. Happy belated Synth Day, everybody. Hell yeah. Yeah, I paid $2,500, Hans Volt says. So yeah, that's about in the neighborhood. And then we have a hold button here, so let's see what that does. Just holds down the thing. I don't know exactly what. I guess that could be useful for drones, right? So if I wanted to use, sort of like could do like a big badass drone. And I just wanted to, kind of like play around with stuff and like, get really deep into some sort of cool drone territory. It's super intense. That filter really screams. It's not quite the MS-20, but that's, the thing about the MS-20 though that I noticed is that the resonance on the monopoly and the Poly 6 are definitely more extreme in terms of like how much shriek you get going. For whatever reason, you always think of the MS-20 as being the shrieky filter synth, but the resonance really breaks up in a beautiful sort of distorted way, but it doesn't get out of control. Like with this, if we crank the resonance all the way, I'm going to turn the volume down a bit because it could be a little annoying. It just gets... like so beyond what anybody could ever use it for as to make me question it's like why did we need that much resonance, you know? I mean, I'm sure someone out there might have a good answer for me, perhaps to do an organ sound, but for me, I've never particularly been you know, that in love with crazy amounts of resonance. Plenty of synths that are amazing didn't have a fully resonant filter, the CS80 being a really great example of it. So I myself don't need as much resonance as this thing packs, but somewhere around 50% is like where I'm happy, you know. That's like a really big, sculpty sort of resonant sound that sounds great, but doesn't get too far. Anything above that, even if I go to like 7 instead of 10, you know, we're already in that territory where it's like a torturing mice, where I'm just not having fun anymore. So, yeah. The Polyvox, that is a screaming filter, but I would actually say, Hans, that the filter in the Polyvox to me is more in that category of the MS-20, where it's not too much until you're at the very top end of it, and even there it like distorts in such a musically beautiful way that you sort of like, it doesn't go as extreme as this. It screams in a nice way, but it's not as like these SSM filters, same thing with the K3, like they're just intense. So, yeah, never felt the need to self-oscillate. You know what it's cool for is, and then again, you don't really need to go full self-oscillate, but what we could do is we could turn the level of all of the VCOs off and try this with some noise. Turn the envelope intensity off and try to do the old tune it. And then apply some keyboard tracking, right? You turn that VCO off all the way, and we sort of get like... You know, we're sort of in this like spooky territory with it, which is cool, you know? There we go. So we're kind of in that territory now where it's close to tracking. Close. I've always had trouble on the Poly 6.2 getting it right into that sweet spot where you could really play it. You know, but it's fun to have this sort of like, you could get it pretty close and maybe use a tuner or two to get it right there. You're probably going to tune maybe one octave of the keyboard really well, and then it's not going to track that well elsewhere. But, you know, you want to put a little extra layer of like into a track as like a cool texture, right? Well, you can do that with that level of resonance, or you know, whatever you want to fucking do. But for me, most of the time, it's not that interesting. So, in tune enough for the synthesizer blues, yes. So, anyways, let's turn some of these guys back on. There we go. Let's see. So, I think we've sort of covered the VCOs. Well, actually, I sort of missed like the most fun, interesting part of these. We could start the first one. We could have different waveforms for every oscillator. We could have different ranges for every oscillator. So let's say we set most of these to 8 feet, transposed normally, right? We can start with a sawtooth. Voice 2 will be a PWM. Right? We could then set voice 3 to be a triangle down an octave. And then we could then set the last VCO to be way the hell up. We'll bring it down one. So just bring it to 4 feet to be able to, so we have, you know, a really interesting sort of sound, right? I mean, super cool. But what's even more fun, and what sort of to me is like the predecessor to wave sequencing, is to then use the arpeggiator. So let's go over the arpeggiator real quick. The speed is from modulation generator 2, which is up here. And we've got a few different modes. We'll start with 1 octave up, and latch just means, so there's off, which is regular play, right? Just playing normally. Then on is going to, when I play a chord, it'll arpeggiate it. I think I had it accidentally on latch there, but you'll notice that it steps through the different VCOs. So when I'm playing normally, the first note will always be a sawtooth wave, because that's what I've set for VCO 1. But if I played the chord in descending order, so from top to bottom instead of from bottom to top, that's the sawtooth wave now. So even the way you play the chord changes the order of the VCOs. Depending on which order of the notes you play, you get a different thing. But what's super cool about the arpeggiator is that it will step through the VCOs, and it doesn't just go off of what order you played the notes. So anyways, I'm going to put it on the latch, and we'll play what is this? G sharp major. Right? But what we can do is then put it into down. So let's check that out. We could then put it to up down. So it goes up and then down, right? Yes. And then we've got multiple octaves. So if I put it to 2 octaves, and then a unique feature I've only seen on the Mono Poly and the Poly 6 is what's called full range. So the arpeggiator will just go all the way up as high as the synth can go, which is super high considering you can adjust these octave ranges super high. John from Edgetone Studios was saying, you completely reminded me why I wanted one of these for so badly for so long, but at least you've got the vintage ad poster. It's pretty awesome. Yeah, this is one of those like legendary vintage synths. And, you know, I've bought quite a few vintage synths that I was surprised by. A lot of the Kawaii synths are like that, where I'm like, this is an amazing synth, and for some reason people don't like talk about these like as much. But this one is like everybody who has one loves it and never gets rid of it. I'm kind of middle of the road on it, to be honest with you guys right now. I think it's really great, but I've got a lot of really great synths in the room. I do love getting the control over everything is great. And I do love this, just that Korg Poly 6 Mono Poly sound is near and dear to my heart. So it's, but it is very similar to the Poly 6. And for what, I mean, part of the problem is, I was talking to Dub Station Zero about this, is, you know, Poly synths are great because you can stack, you know, do a 6-voice mono synth with most of the Poly synths from the 80s. And that's probably going to sound more awesome than your mono synth does. I like monosynths, and I've been buying more monosynths than polysynths because I've really wanted to like try to see if I could understand the appeal of the monosynth. But I am in my heart, my thing are big cinematic analog or digital, vintage digital polysynths. And this one's kind of in an interesting middle area, but I think what makes it where it would be hard for anybody to sell is just how unique it is. Like these features that you don't see anywhere else are just super cool. Let's see. So I'm on Monopony at the Synthwap with the OG display pop-up card around the top. Yeah, that's a thing. So you can get cards that go over the top, which are basically presets, which is fun. 40 Thieves asks, how do you feel about an upgrade kit like the TubeTech Modi Poly to clock them arpeggios? I have not modded any of my synths, I think that's true to say, but I will say right now I've been having trouble with the CV in to this. So I don't know, you guys who do modular more than I might be able to help me with this. If you're watching this in the future, drop a comment. But when I run the CV out of my Kenton Pro Solo into this, it has like a noisy character. Low notes are fine. Higher notes have like a noisy thing. And by noise, I mean like it's literally what it sounds like if you apply noise as FM to an oscillator, where it's not, it's like kind of hitting the note. Like you can hear what note it is, but it doesn't sound like a clean saw. It sounds like a fucking all over the place saw. But I will say this. When you run CV in to this synth, as far as I can tell, you don't get this thing where you're cycling through the different VCOs. It kind of locks it into unison mode, which for me is a bit of a downer because I would like to be able to do more like what's going on with the arpeggiator, where you're cycling through the VCOs, but do more complicated, interesting patterns via MIDI. Even if it's monophonic, I would be fine if I could sequence out something that's not just, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, as far as the, as far as it being an arpeggio, right? Where it's just going up and down, or just up, up. You guys know what an arpeggio is. So I was really excited to do that, and it doesn't seem like I can do that. Any of you monopoly gods who could tell me what's going on with that, let me know. But so for that reason alone, I think I would definitely consider, because the only way to really run MIDI into a vintage monopoly is with something like an internal MIDI mod that allows you to run MIDI and polyphonically. So I think with a synth like this, it might be worth it. For synthesizers that are not polyphonic monosynths, right? So like I've got a Moog Source, Roland SH2, Korg MS-20. Those are all vintage monosynths that are one note at a time. I think something like a Pro Solo from Kenton's probably good, like some sort of just MIDI to CV converter. That's probably fine. But definitely something to think about. I'll play some more chords while I'm getting this going. Sorry, it's so easy to get lost just having fun with this thing. So that story, Jason, about being at a warehouse rave and seeing someone playing a Monopoly live is often interesting, Hans, that your Kenton doesn't work well with it. Use a Dopefer. I might have to get one of those because, yeah, I'm having trouble with running my Kenton Pro Solo Mark II in. For some reason, the CV just doesn't sound right. And the only options I see to change for CV anyways are, like hertz to volts and stuff like that. So which doesn't seem to be a problem. It's playing in tune. It's just noisy tune. Shane asks, have you ever played an Oberheim SEM? No, I have not. I would love to. Yeah, gotta bounce. Maybe we'll do an AX60. I would still love to do the AX80, AX60 stream. My AX80, which is usually over there, John, is in the shop right now. I'm getting it repaired. And it is repaired, actually. I'm just waiting to pick it back up because it's about an hour and a half away from my Synth Tech severed machines. Which is, by the way, if you ever need a synth repaired, Ramiro's your guy. Severed Machines, it's awesome. Look him up on Facebook or Instagram. Just a really meticulous, awesome guy, super honest, just what you want from a synth tech. But I would love to do a stream checking out and comparing those two synths. That would be so much fun, John. So anyways, be awesome. Keep making great music. Love your music, man. Have a good night, okay? Let's see. Seems strike Strange Synth meet the game Battleship, but they sound great. What's a dope for? I'll see you later. How's it going, Mind Idiot? Welcome to the stream, my friend. So somebody asked about what does the big yellow effects button do? So this is a good enough time as any to sort of get into that. So let's go ahead and turn this up and I'm gonna set these all back to sawtooths for now. We'll start with sawtooths for now, all at the same range, just so that we're kind of... Yeah, cool. So we're there. Now, effects on this synth, it's interesting that they chose the word effects because there's an effects section on the Poly 6 as well, which has chorus, phaser, and ensemble. So they knew what effects were, but the effects on this synth are nothing like the Poly 6 or what most of us would even think of as effects, right? The effects on this synth are actually either FM, so analog FM or cross mod as it's called, and then there's also sync, so hard sync. So we'll start with sync and we'll go through the thing. So we can control, we've got 3 switches here. We've got sync, cross mod, or sync and cross mod. We'll start on sync. We'll start with that one. We got single and double. I believe that is whether or not the VCOs, how the VCOs are split up when it comes to hard sync and cross mod. So I believe on double, don't quote me on this at all. VCOs 2 and 4 are being slaved to 1 and 3. That would be my guess there. And then we have how we control the sweep of that can either be done with the modulation generator 1 or with the filter envelope. So without further ado, let's just hit the button and see what happens. So this is the sound on its own with the effects off. 4 stacked VCAs or VCOs. Right? That's that sound. Hit the effects button. Nothing's exactly happened, right? Kind of. You can hear it's louder. Little different timbre. What's happening is the VCO is causing the other VCOs to re-trigger, which in and of itself is not super interesting, but you'll notice that it's less chorusy. So you can hear the movement in there. When I hit this on, it will cancel that because it's going to lock all of those into phase. I'd actually be curious to see if you could detune it, because this would be how you could create sort of an absinthe style pluck. Doesn't seem like you can. Yeah, it's actually changing the timbre, which makes sense. That's what hard sync does. But what we really want to do is increase some sort of pitch variation to the VCOs. And what that will do, and we can actually do that with the wheel here. So we could use the pitch wheel in its standard mode, which is just a lock pitch like a normal pitch wheel. Right? That's what a pitch wheel does. But if we put it into slave VCO mode, what that will do is adjust the pitch of the voltage-controlled oscillators, which are going to change the timbre instead of the pitch, because the tuning is locked. That's how you want to think about hard sync, is the tuning is locked, but you'll get a timbre change, or the way the synth sounds, instead of a tuning change with the VCOs. I know it's a little complicated for the first time. Let's crank it up even further. Let's go down a little bit. So this is your sort of hard sync type sound. But when you hear it like that, it's kind of a little weird. So what we really want to do is kind of automate that sweeping. So what we can do is, right now it's routed to movement generator 1. I don't know how well you can see that on the screen, but as we increase the frequency mod, you'll hear that this LFO will begin to affect it. We start getting that whoa, whoa type sound. And I just want to emphasize, if I turn that off, we go back to just regular unison. This is a much more aggressive. And of course, unlike on the Poly 6, we actually have a selection of different LFO shapes. So we can get a sort of like more plucky type sound to the sync, which might be more familiar. Or a reverse saw. Or a square. That would be very beautiful with the arpeggiator on, I think. So let's go ahead and try that real quick. Yeah, super cool. You know, that's a thing, right? But the more common thing that you'll probably immediately recognize the sync sound from is if we use the filter envelope generator to create a sort of a wah type shape to the sound. So this should be kind of more like something you might think of, but let's make sure we get enough in there. That's how we get these sorts of like vowel-y type. Vowel-y type of effects. Yeah, welcome back, Aquatic. How's it going? To be able to get, you know, that kind of hard sync sound. I should learn how to play, you know, the Daft Punk sound and or song, as well as the song by the Cars that used that from the original Prophet 5. Yeah. I have a hard time playing those wah sounds of an instrument without moving my mouth along. Yeah, for sure. That is definitely a thing. So that is hard sync, and it's not unique to this synth, but this one definitely has a great sound to it. Let's go ahead and use cross mod. So if we move that over here, basically the same idea, but now what we're doing is we're imposing the pitch of one oscillator onto another, right? So that's going to have a different sound. Can often have a very out of tune sound, depending on how you do it. So let's swap it back over to the LFO, aka the modulation generator. I'm going to put it over on a triangle, and I'm going to set all of the waveforms also to triangle waves, because with the effects off, you'll notice like there's a reason FM and sine waves go well together. Triangle is your more common analog way to get something that sounds like a sine wave, because it's more of a pure tone as opposed to being a, you know, having a lot of harmonics to it. Right, so it's a better starting point, because if we start FMing really big, ballsy, sawtooth stuff. It just gets crazy quick. So turning on the cross mod, let's hear how that sounds. So with it off, it's interesting actually. With a subtle amount, you almost get like a supersaw type of sound. And then in this middle area, it doesn't sound great. And you can hear that intermodular distortion. It's actually like a really low note kind of coming up. But once you get towards the top of the range, you start getting these cool metallic bell type tones. And of course, as we change the octave ranges, just like on an FM synth, we start getting different timbre changes. So we can actually get in tune enough. Yo, Shane, thank you very much for the $7.77 donation. Shane said, from a humble scum, thank you for the great videos. Thank you very much, Shane. I appreciate you. You're amazing, and I appreciate everybody who supports the stream, whether it's through memberships or donations. You guys are amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, so with this, you can get it into a tunable range. Right, but you just got to be careful, because if you're in this kind of middle range, I mean, that's kind of cool in its own way, right? But it's a little inharmonic, right? And that's sort of the risk you run with cross mod on analog synths. Let's take this even further and see if we can get like crazy. Wow, that's crazy sounding. Just craziness. Whoa, that's a pretty cool, like, sci-fi sound.
That is one seriously perverted bitch.
Have a great night, Autumn. Last school night. I love that. Yeah, so you can get some cool, like, Doctor Who type sounds out of this. Really completely different types of sound. So right now, I believe that's being controlled by the LFO. Super cool that also you can control this and get back to, you know, sort of almost like a ring modulator type sounds out of that, but when you vary that. But we can control that too with that same envelope, the VCF envelope. So going back up, let's add some attack to that. Oh, this is interesting. Hans, you could tell me, does the envelope not do anything with the cross mod? Is that just static? It seems like it's just static, like, you know. We can also control the cross mod just by changing these levels. That's like a really kind of cool, like almost fifth harmonic sound. Yeah, it does have that feedback oscillator type of sound for sure. I never really thought about it, but that's definitely a thing. Yeah. But I mean, we know if you hammer those kinds of mid-range X-mod through distortion, they sound cool. Yeah, so mine is right. Right now, it's a little clangorous, but you can run it through some distortion and get some pretty crazy effects out of it. But what you can do too is now do so it sounds like the X mod is just static, like you'll always get that cross mod sound, but the frequency modulation can be controlled by this envelope over here, or I'm sorry, the hard sync. So now we can use both. This is pretty cool. So you can kind of get these like sounds where it disappears at the start. Yeah, super cool, but with less extreme settings. Or if we add some attack. Vulture Mom, no, you cannot. Actually, the only real way to save this would be to take a snapshot on your phone so you can remember where all the knobs go. The good and the bad with a synthesizer like this is that, what you see is what you get, which I think is super cool and is inspiring in a way because it makes you like sort of engage with the instrument every time. There's something incredible about a Roland D50 that has, especially of all of the memory cards, like there's just so many great sounds. They're so complex and interesting, but you sort of have a tendency with the later 80s and into the 90s workstation synths where you just pick a sound and go, and you don't really invest yourself or create your own sounds because it's too complicated. Korg M1, synths like that, DX7, stuff like that, where it's a Korg wave station, which I love, but I am under no, illusion that I'm going to be programming wave station sounds anytime soon, right? WaveState at least made a pretty good attempt at trying to make wave sequencing possible. With this, though, what it is like, one good thing is, though, when I turn the synth off and turn it back on, it's the same sound because it is literally just like what's happening on the front panel. That's it. And they do sell, someone mentioned it earlier, overlays you could do. So like basically a big paper cutout, you set it over the synth knobs and then turn the knobs to where it says on the cutout. And that's a preset, which is super fun. I've noticed that later Korg synths have no marks around the knobs. Yeah, that's a thing. I think more Moog, the Mini Moog in particular, the design of that synth influenced a lot of synth manufacturers, and you can kind of see that here with this synth in the Poly 6 for sure. Yeah. Did your tech do any filter calibration on this, or did he leave it how it was? I haven't taken this to my tech yet. I kind of take synths to the tech when I feel like there's something I want to get fixed up. With this one, it would be the ground hum is kind of annoying, so it'd be nice to maybe get that under control. But other than that, this one sounds pretty good. I'm not hurting this. Yeah. Have the wave state, it does a great job. Yeah, so that's the thing. Like the wave state for me is got enough knobs that you can actually interact with it. The wave station's just like virtually impossible, especially because if you change a wave sequence, it's going to change that wave sequence in other patches. So it's kind of like there is no blank wave sequences to play with. Anyways, going back to sync here real quick. I don't know, or let me turn a couple of these guys down. You can control that here. Oh, I'm sorry, over here. Going to sawtooth here. So even though we have a little shape to it. You can get really crazy high up with it. Yo, Crystal Love, how's it going? So yeah, I think we have covered Let's see, what else have we covered here? I don't know, Hans, if there's anything you'd like me to hit here. Yes, a lot of people have to calibrate the monopoly, the Behringer monopoly, so it's more in the range. That's a thing. I don't know why Behringer had it. Maybe they modeled it off of a wonky monopoly, because the filters do sound dark, but not as dark as the Behringer one seems to be. So I think we've covered most of it. So we've got our different VCOs. We've got Portamento, detune, transpose, key assign modes we've covered. We've covered the effects section here, pulse width modulation. We've got two different modulation generators, so that's pretty cool as compared to the one on the Poly 6, plus it's got different waveforms instead of just triangle. Arpeggiator is the same as the Poly 6, I believe. We've got two wheels, but we've got more choices with it, and we've got different intensity knobs for both. Volume knob. What else? Voltage controlled filter, cutoff resonance, envelope intensity, keyboard tracking, the ADSR of both of those, the noise generator, different trigger modes, auto dampening. So I believe we have at least covered everything. Keybed's interesting. So I've talked to a few people. Madeira would be one of them, who have, and who else? Like Internal Command from Instagram is another Poly 6 friend of mine. And they've both said, I believe they've both said, sorry if I'm confusing one with the other, that the keybed on the Poly 6 is not great. And the Poly 6 keybed that I have is wonderful. So I wonder if it's been rebuilt, because I bought it from a synth tech in Japan who did go through and restore it. But the keybed on this is pretty good. I mean, for me, honestly, like... plenty of dexterity. I think it feels great. I really wish I had the Poly 6 here just to do a one-to-one comparison, but I do not hate it at all. I mean, and even if we put it into, poly mode, I feel very... we got some crazy ranges here. I don't know. I feel like it's very nice. I wouldn't have any inclination to fix it. Really, the only keybed that I would like to fix is the SQ80. That one's just not great, which is a shame because it is poly aftertouch, So, yeah. Both LFOs. Yeah, so we do have two LFOs. It's okay on the mini log. You've got some new old stuff. That's true. How's it going, Torben? Welcome to the stream. Yeah, oh, you've got a Poly 6 too? Yeah, so that's the thing. I've heard people complain about the Poly 6 keybed, but for me anyways, not really a thing. Yeah, so the LFOs, 40 Thieves, are slightly confusing to me because the arpeggiator is controlled by movement generator 2 or modulation generator 2, so LFO 2, right? Interestingly, I don't see a way to, we've got control over LFO 1 here. So, for instance, if we bring the cutoff down, right, let's set these back to pulse width modulation. What am I doing? Let's set these to 8 feet. Pulse width modulation. Make sure we just have the same. So, yeah, it's weird. Pulse width modulation can be created from the envelope generator. So this is a thing I missed, actually, but it can actually come from the VCF envelope generator as well. So we could go all the way through 0, I believe, at the top of that shape. Actually pretty cool, right? Or maybe just shy of that, so we get that real sweep sound with the pulse width. But we could also control it with either modulation generator. We'll use 2 for now. They're a little touchy, and we can see how fast they go too. You can hear that we can go into audio rate, so you're getting that intermodular ring mod distortion. Wow, that's crazy. Anyways, we could also use the filter modulation generator 1 on the filter. But can you play Never Trust a Klingon by Spock on it? That's hilarious. You sure got to get used to not stepping through any presets. Yes, that's definitely a thing, Torben. Me again says the original Poly 6 keybed needs to be rebuilt. So yeah, it's one of those things. I honestly don't know the answer to this one because I've heard people say the Poly 6 keybed's terrible, or maybe some people's just like degraded over the years. But this one, I'm under the impression this is an original keybed and it feels great. Maybe it was rebuilt too. You never really know. This is like a mint condition monopoly, so who knows really. Yeah, Shane asks, I forget if I asked this before, but beside the JX3P and DX7, what other vintage synths fairly reliable and not typically too expensive in terms of upkeep? The mids of the sound, Torben points out, is a very analog thing. Yeah, I agree with that. That's a tough one, Shane. So Roland D50, built like a tank, awesome keybed. I'm going to just literally look around the room. This Moog Source feels great, not really too aware of any issues, but it does have membrane switches. Those are known to go bad. Same problem with the Polaris. I think there's a lot of DW8000s out there that are in great condition. The Alpha Junos too, just really great. Great luck with the Kawai synths. The Ensoniq synths are like that too. Not like really known for major issues, like game-changing issues, game-ending issues. But I would go synth by synth because certain synths, even if they're from like a great manufacturer like Korg, Monopoly and the Poly 6 have almost all the same components, but that one little difference means that, Poly 6s just like to commit seppuku. That's just part of the deal. So I would definitely go case by case, Shane. I wish I could give you a more fair answer there, but that's basically just looking around the room what I would say. Yeah. Matrix 6 still working like a champ. Yeah, I've got a mint Matrix 6. I really don't know though. Like I don't want to say about Oberheims because I really don't know. It's like just not in a good or a bad way. I just don't know. Like truly ignorant to that one. I think I got the truck from you at least. Sounds pretty good. Heavy wet reverb trick. Yeah. We need an overrated and underrated gear segment. Yeah, I should do that. I absolutely should. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I could do my top 5 underrated synths and actually play them out on a video sometime. When it comes to top 5 overrated, I mean, to a certain extent, you guys probably could just go on Reverb, filter by 70s, 80s, and then price high to low, and that's going to be your overrated. Just in the sense that, or overvalued, in the sense that no synth should cost $20,000. Like, you're buying it for a different reason than what it can do as a synthesizer. You're interested in something else. And I get it, because I almost got a CS70M because I love Blade Runner, so I get it, but at the same time, I think what this channel's always been about, I didn't really mean for it to be this way. It's just how I feel, and something that I don't think is said very much on YouTube. YouTube, like all the synth tubers, are trying to get you to buy things. And I suppose there's a way in which, like, maybe you watch this video and you're like, maybe I'll buy this. But what I really want to do is inform you honestly about the pros and cons of different synthesizers and get to where it is, a lucid, sane discussion about the cost of a synthesizer versus its value to you. If you're listening to this and you fall in love with the sound, then it's going to have that value. But there's a lot of vintage synths and modern synths too. I get comments all the time mad at me because I said the $5,000 Mini Moog re-release was bullshit. And people are like, they always cost that much and Moog's a great company. I agree with that. I'm not saying that's not true. I think Moog is one of the coolest companies in America right now, and I would love to support them. But I'm not spending $5,000 on a Mini Moog clone. I think it's something like 17 times the cost of the Behringer Mini Moog clone. Just think about that. Yo, Ryan, what's up? Hey, how's it going, Nikki? You're hot too. What you guys up to tonight? Yo, Hoodie just dumped $6.66. I adore you more than O2. Never stop being our daddy synth man. Absolutely, my friend. Good to see you. So yeah, anyways, where was I? Filter cutoff. So let's turn the envelope intensity down, add a little resonance, and bring the cutoff down. And then as we increase the mod wheel here, I am not hearing anything. Oh, that's why. Cool. But where I think it gets very interesting, as opposed to just kind of, dubstep type of a sound, is when we use, say, something like the pluck, so we can get some cool sort of eighth note plucks. I said the pluck, it's the sawtooth shape on the modulation generator.
That is one seriously perverted bitch.
Prodigy sounds identical for $2,500. Yeah. So, I've got a Moog source right down here. And so I'm probably not going to buy another Moog. Honestly, I bought a Moog just to see what Moogs are all about. And this one's pretty good. But I'm probably not going to buy another Moog, immediately anyways. Jim has the Sonic 6, right? Like, that's awesome. I'd love to check that out sometime. Yeah. It sure can do without reverb. Maybe use decay release instead. Yeah, you could, absolutely. No one died yet in the D&D game. TPK, maybe? You can get the new Udo Super Gemini for that cost, and that's a hell of a synth. That's true. That's very true. Like, I'd rather have something like the Super Gemini than a Mini Moog. That's where I'm at. I think that's more of a captivating sell. You can really make an argument for like a truly bitimbral but one knob per function synth. That's awesome. So yes. Let's see what else we have here. Source is really cool. Yeah, Behringer Model D comes much closer to the Mini for €200. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah, I think that Udo definitely is the winner of Super Booth. I think they had the most hype behind him this time, which is super cool. But anyways, what I want to do is take this pluck sound, which is super cool, but by using the arpeggiator with it, we should be able to get some pretty crazy shit. We're using LFO1 to control the pluck and LFO2 to control the rate of the arpeggiator, which can also be a pluck, right? We could turn that into a pluck by adding some envelope intensity here. And then by using latch and up and down and shit like that, we can, get two different rates for some plucks that are coming from the LFO and some plucks coming from the arpeggiator. So let's try this out. That's also a thing you can do by cutting off one of these VCOs, turning it off. You sort of get like trance gate type effects. That's a sick polyrhythm. It's possible by using the arpeggiator, which is being clocked by one LFO, and the other LFO controlling the filter with a sawtooth shape, which is also giving it a pluck sound. So here it's grooving in another vibe. Basically turning it into kick drums. See that resonance? The resonance is so extreme that even if these are higher notes, it's just the fundamental of the self-oscillating filter is giving it that kick drum sound. But I mean, what a beautiful sort of texture. Got a little lost there for a second. It was so beautiful, those different interesting textures you could get. I mean, just talk about just right there, if for no other reason than kind of putting it into poly mode and turning on the arpeggiator and then using that LFO on the sawtooth wave. That's the secret sauce. Like if you want to get an awesome, totally gorgeous, and I'm just using the Inktomi plugin for reverb. Just, whew, I mean, right there, that's like a fucking soundtrack, right, for a fucking movie. And it just sounds great because it's got that wonderful warm analog SSM 2044 filter. So it's, you know, it's hard to argue with that. How much does that VCF thin out the bass? Well, I could show you real quick, I suppose. Let's go into Unison mode and set this to a bunch of mofugging, turn that up a little bit and just make these like this. And turn this off. Turn this to a bunch of sawtooth waves. So we'll go, I don't know, low F, right? And then we'll bring up the resonance. We'll get a nice bassy sound. We don't need as much release. Just, right, that should be fine. Someone said R2D2 on meth earlier. I thought that was great. Sounds like a mouse creeping around an old church at night looking for that cheese. I love that. But to answer your question, let's add some resonance. So we definitely lose some bass, right? But I would say compared to basically all the other vintage analog filters, the Korg and SSM filters just don't cancel out bass the way the Moog ladder filters and even the Roland filters do. With my headphones on, so it's a little harder for me to judge the bass than if I was using my studio monitors, the big ass subwoofer, so I could just kind of gauge it off of how much the room's vibrating. But at least the way it sounds in my headphones, there's still like a really good amount of bass content in there. And of course you can dial the resonance up and then bring it down and just get those earth-shattering lows. Cool, Cole. Welcome to the stream. So, complicated question. If by differences in terms of sound is what you mean, I would say probably not so much. Starsky Carr did a really good comparison video between a Korg Mono Poly, a vintage one, and the Behringer remake. And in his video, he found that the filter wasn't calibrated at all like a Mono Poly, but you can calibrate them on the Behringer version to make it closer to a Mono Poly filter. And once he did that, I was surprised by how similar they sounded. So if that's what you mean by, does it have the same knobs? Does it have the same basic functions? Does it sound about the same? I would say, yeah, probably does, just from watching that video. Yeah. Monopoly sound different to themselves anyways. Yeah, that's for sure. If we had two monopolys, I'm sure we could hear some differences between the two of them. Yeah. So it kind of depends. Cool, Cole. On the other hand, some people don't like the ethical things with Behringer, which I totally understand and respect. And then some people, so like when it comes to buying vintage synths, this is one of those that has like the legendary name. And whenever that's the case, you're more likely to pay a premium for it. So this is, I think this is the most expensive vintage Korg, other than maybe a Trident, and I think that's just because it's rare and old. But like, as far as the synths that people like kind of consider the golden era Korg synths, I would say that would be the MS-20 forward. So very end of the 70s into the Korg Poly 6, the Mono Poly, the Poly 61, the DW8000, and the Wave Station. Those are like your classic Korg vintage synths, and I would say this is the most expensive one. And do you get more from this one than you do for, say, from a Poly 6? You do and you don't. There's some really cool things about this one, but if I had to have one or the other, I might still go with the Poly 6, and it's usually about $1,000 cheaper, so that's worth something. It depends on what you're looking at. Oh, I'm sorry your kid's sick, Dub. I hope they feel better soon. The PS series, yes, Torben, that's true. I'm sorry. So Korg did put out a modular series, kind of like the Roland 100 M or whatever. And yeah, those go for like $30,000. So I wasn't even counting that as a thing. Let's see. 2 decades ago, my older brother went to a flea market and he said they have this keyboard, Corgi. Have you ever heard of it? Yeah, it is super cool. Yeah. No, then the Poly 6 is what you're saying, Torben. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I really like the Poly 6. It's one of my favorite synthesizers. It would be hard to ever sell that one. And I think that might be one of my issues with this one. SynthMade, welcome to the stream, is it's so similar to the Poly 6 in a certain kind of way that I start to have a little bit of like overlap where I'm like, ooh, you know, that's kind of interesting there, for better or worse. Uncivilized by Psyche. I don't know that song actually. You should buy an MS-10 solely so we can live vicariously through you. Well, it'd be hard for me to buy. I'm not that interested in MS-10 because I have the MS-20, right? Even though Look Mum No Computer says he prefers the MS-10 to the MS-20, MS-20 has more potential. And I know I haven't fully understood the potential of that patch bay. That's one of the reasons I'm getting some synths fixed, is because that live stream was a bit of a shit show trying to you know, make that work when some of those patch connections were just tarnished, I guess is what Ramiro from Severed Machines was saying. So I'm doing great, Tokyo Scarab. How are you? All the vintage Korg filters are amazing. Modern filters are blah. It's a shame with all the modern features they can't harness the legacy of their filter sound. I like the sound of the Korg Prologue. I thought it had a good filter. It's a different filter than the Minilog XD though, so I can't really speak to that synth. But I thought it sounded good. It was dark though, and more like it certainly had plenty of bass, but it was like it didn't have the same clarity in the high end, which was one of my things about it, which is great if you want it to, because otherwise that synth sounds so clean and like so modern that it would, and like slightly scooped, like, so it already sounds like EQ'd, you know, like that without some loss of high end, it would probably just sound way too clean and like you're just playing a VST, even though it's analog. So it's hard to say. You'll do more interesting stuff with the monopoly with no presets and 4 VCOs. Yeah, I mean, it's there's no doubt that this is more, there's more to it. There's more to dig your teeth into as far as synthesis goes with the monopoly. You know, for me, if there was like a 6-voice monopoly that was truly polyphonic, that would be like the dream Korg vintage synth, right? But, you know, for what it's worth, then it wouldn't, I don't know if I'd want 4 VCO separate sets of knobs, though, you know, like that might not be what I want. So it's hard to say. This is a very cool synth. It sounds beautiful, right? It is cinematic, and I think for that reason, it's going to stay with me. But I would have to say that, like, on a scum ranking of synthesizers, vintage synths that I have, this one would not score high relative to its price. Other than its uniqueness, right? I think that's what makes it special and why it does command a higher price, is because there really isn't anything else like this in the vintage synth market. Moog Matriarch would be the best example of something kind of like a modern implementation of this, like 4 separate VCOs that can be polyphonic or paraphonic, or I'm sorry, paraphonic or monophonic. But you know, it's kind of, it's an interesting sort of oddity, and I love that Korg at the time wanted to experiment with something like this. But tonally, it is the same oscillators and filter of the Poly 6, so that's for me a little bit where I'm like, when I'm using it in polyphonic mode, it's a little like, well, I don't know what kind of sound. I had some weird shit set up here. Whoa. I sort of think we're sort of leaning out of tune. Oh, that's what it was. I don't know. It just reminds me so much of the Poly 6, but then, yeah, I'd rather have it be polyphonic instead of paraphonic. So I guess it's kind of more about doing leads or basses, but then maybe you sometimes use it. I don't know. It's not that the paraphonic thing is a game. Like, I guess what I'm saying is, for me, sorry, this is a bit of a ramble. because I have the Poly 6, it changes how much this does something that I don't already have access to. I am very fortunate to have a Poly 6, right? Like most people don't have the luxury of having so many vintage synths around. So for 99.99% of people, this is going to be so unique. This is going to be so special. This is going to be so different from every other synth, even from every other mono synth that you might have, that it would probably be worth it. If I didn't have a Poly 6, like if my Poly 6 broke, this would get me 90% of the way there with getting that Poly 6 sound. Because I don't really need more than 4 notes at a time. And I do play a lot. I do have a tendency of playing a lot of stuff that's kind of like, you know... playing this type of thing, you know? So, you know, the fact that I don't usually play necessarily like a chord, and it still sounds good when you play it that way, right? I mean, it still sounds good, right? So maybe maybe polyphony is not all it's cracked up to be. It's hard to say. Let's see what else we have. Torben asks, how would you rate the Polaris to the Poly 6? I still feel like I haven't had a opportunity to go deep enough with the Polaris. I hope to do a video on the Polaris like I did with the D50, where I go really deep into every single parameter and show how to program it. The Polaris, the stepping of the filter is cool, but when I was using it in a production recently, the stepping of that filter started to bother me. I like it when I'm just playing it kind of like this, like free form and having fun and whatever. But when you start to crank the resonance, which is what you want to do with an analog filter, that's what makes it sound juicy and interesting as compared to just, you know, a VST or whatever. It really did start to bother me. And there's a way in which the VCOs are a little tinny and cold. I mean, I think the Polaris is pretty awesome, but I think the problem with the Polaris is I like the AX60 so much, which is a much cheaper polysynth most of the time, that has similar Curtis electronics inside of it. As far as the filters and the VCOs are very similar. And so for that reason, if I want that kind of cold analog thing, I actually think I'd go towards the AX60 before I go to the Polaris. And I love the Poly 6. Like, I just love that it's so different from a VST. It's so dark and warm and just has depth or whatever you want to call that. And because it's one knob per function too, whereas the Polaris has some like, you know, some sliders per function, but then it also has like assignable controls for the other ones. It's just not as immediate. It could be that once I get to know the Polaris better, because it is bitimbral and all of that, like, and you know, maybe if I become a, you know, the Polaris sensei, then it will be a little bit more like, oh, wow, this is really powerful. But just in terms of like the raw components and the raw sound, it's kind of hard to fuck with the Poly 6. On the other hand, the Polaris does have this wonderful kind of mid-rangey thing where it just always like will sound good in a mix. Whereas a lot of the times, once I'm out of the inspiration phase with the Poly 6, it's a motherfucker to EQ to get it into the mix. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's that. Let me catch up with the chat. Yeah, Minilog XD has a great filter and very similar to the Prolog, Jim says. Even my Monolog has a great filter on it. Yeah, Jim, everybody loves the Monolog filters for sure. 40 Thieves says, I think it's a keeper. Yes, it's unique. 4 oscillators is great. I have the Dave Smith Polyevolver, way different, but the 4 oscillators makes it huge. Polyevolver is the only relatively new synth that I would be interested in buying, other that or the Andromeda, right? Polyevolver, I think, is going to one day be considered like one of the greatest synths of all time. That synth is just crazy. And I guess in some ways the Prophet 12 sort of supersedes it, but I'd be more interested to have that like starting point. And I think it has some features like feedback and things. Maybe the Prophet 12 had feedback now that I think about it, but I'd be interested to know if there's really anything that the Polyevolver does versus the Prophet 12. But either way, that keyboard seems like one of the coolest synths ever, 40 Thieves, so I would never get rid of that. Let's see what else is going on. Oh, Jim says the Minilog XD filter is better than the OG Minilog. That's interesting. Jim says, I found 4 notes is enough for me as well. I think more than that's a bit overkill. I agree. It depends. If you want to do like really long release stuff, which a lot of like Poly 6 style pads do, you do run out of those voices relatively quickly. Torben says, your D50 videos in the PG-1000 are amongst the best on YouTube. Thank you very much. I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into those guys. Over 11 hours filming. I don't know how many hours editing, but over 4,000 edits went into that one video. So I put a lot of work into it because I just wanted to sort of do like almost like community service where I felt like there just wasn't a good video out there. A lot of what I do on my channel is not that original. Like, let's be honest, like I'm turning a monopoly on and going through. There's other YouTubers who've done that. I know that, but it's still fun to do it. And hopefully my lens is useful to you guys because I see things a little bit different. And some of the people who watch this channel every week sort of, I've noticed, have a similar taste to me as well. I like big, cinematic, dark, industrial, but beautiful, organic, emotional, evocative type sounds. And so that's what I'm looking for. There's other people who like playing funk on their synthesizers, and they're going to have a different sort of taste and what they're looking for out of a synth. You know, they might get more out of a synth that I might be like, I am not into this, you know? So there's that. But with that video you're talking about, Torben, I really just felt like, why has no one covered how to program a D50? And so, because I wanted to learn how to do it, right? So how do you learn? You put it in YouTube. You YouTube how to program a D50, and there really wasn't anything out there. So I was like, this is my moment, you know, or at least this is my time to do some good in the world and try to get some attention to that synth. Because even with the software versions and the cloud versions, they don't make it particularly easy to understand what's going on in there. So hopefully it's helpful to somebody somewhere. So thank you very much, Torben. I appreciate that. If you solder some resistors in there, it'll rain in the stepping on the filter. You can do that on the Jupiter 6. I didn't know that. That might be something I look into doing because, yeah, the stepping is just a little bit. I think it's kind of cool. Like there's a way in which the stepping as it approaches the high end gets like really sort of crystalline. I know it sounds crazy to say about stepping, but like comparing it to like the typical MIDI stepping you get from the DW8000 or the DSS1 when you're not using the the NRPM way of doing it. You know, that's one thing. The stepping I'm talking about was explained to me by Ramiro from Severed Machines as having something to do with the digital control of the filter, which is separate from just like MIDI. And so you get these weird sorts of like glitchy, chirpy, but really gorgeous sounds. So again, when you're just sort of playing it, you get a certain sort of thing. But it's different than maybe, I don't know how to say it, like, sometimes you just want to have like a big pad with a lot of resonance, and then that chirping gets a little bit like, oh man, I wish that wasn't there. So I don't know what to say about that. Trigon 6 looks fun. Yeah, I think so. I think for me, I in my video on it, I just, commented that there's a lot that, Sequential's always had problems with brand differentiation where they're, they've got a lot of synths that are very similar. You've got the Prophet 08, you've got the Prophet Rev 2, which is basically a Prophet 08 update. You've got a Prophet 6, you've got a Prophet 5, you've got, OB6, which is basically a Prophet 6 with different voice cards. And now you've got the Trigon 6, which is basically a lot of the same internals as a Prophet 6, but with different voice and filter cards. So, they just have a lot of synths that are similar. They're all really great in their own right. Like, anybody would be lucky to have one of them. But I do think they have a bit of a problem with, like, trying to make it where they have different kinds of synths. They have a lot of similar stuff right now. Let's see. Jim says, I like aggressive sounding synths, hence my love for Korg. Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about. We have like a taste here on this channel for certain types of sounds, and I agree with Jim. Like, I like a synth that has that aggression to it. Darwazu, I have not Machine Storm. Yeah, well, I love funk too, don't get me wrong. I was just saying, like, there's a certain kind of thing we're going for. I did not know that. Try a Poly 61. Well, I've definitely been interested in that synth as well. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and move over here to the main camera here. A Tetra, which is part of a Prophet. Yeah, the different versions of things. Pro ones. Yeah, there's just a lot that's kind of in the same territory. Pro 2, Pro 3, for better or worse. Prophet 12, right? So, but anyways, guys, I'm Vulture Culture. It's been a great one. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. If you enjoy the streams, one of the best ways you can support it is directly by becoming a member. Right below the videos, a little button says join. $5 a month, and you get some cool stuff with it. Not only do you get emojis, you also get, right now, it's the Kwai R53 drum samples. You get those for free. The D50 sound library is coming out. You guys will get that for free. Reverb tonight is from Inktomi. You guys will get that for free if you're members of the channel. It helps me out. It's a way to say thank you. You can also gift memberships to other people too. So you don't have to just buy your own membership. You can also buy them for other people, which is super sweet. Yeah, it went a little bit longer, but whenever there's questions, I love answering them. So anyways, guys, I hope you guys have a great week. Love and light, bitches. I'm out.